Today, the Supreme Court had two important rulings. One of them kind of okay, although we'll see what the lower courts do now that it's been punted back to them. The other, absolutely horrible for the future of American democracy. And we're gonna start there with the absolutely horrible, and that has to do with partisan gerrymandering. Effectively, the Supreme Court has decided that they just don't want to get involved in that sort of thing. With Chief Justice John Roberts saying, "We conclude that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts. Federal judges have no license to reallocate political power between the two major political parties, with no plausible grant of authority in the Constitution and no legal standards to limit and direct their decisions." Now, some of that makes some sense. The issue, though, is that gerrymandering does not come about because of a close, careful reading of the Constitution. It's just partisan BS that's been developed over time to give an advantage to whoever was already in charge. And thus, you need someone other than those same elected officials to adjudicate whether a gerrymandered map is fair or not. And we know, and we're gonna give you lots of examples of horrible ones. And now, the idea was always going to be, in particular cases, hey, maybe it'll go to the Supreme Court. But say goodbye to that. Apparently it's not gonna happen in the near future.
Yeah, this is upsetting. Obviously, gerrymandering on the basis of race is unconstitutional. And by all logic, partisan gerrymandering, just by the way things are drawn, it's 100% about race. They are, if you just look at the different communities and you put pictures on a map, no one would not be able to see that it's about race. And so because they're not calling it race gerrymandering, it gets to slide by, which is wild for me.
Yeah.
Well, they talk about how, at least in their opinion, decision, how it wasn't written up in the Constitution originally, so we can't do anything that federal judges may decide before. Federal judges, should they also not have a say either? The whole point is this: from the bottom to the top, the level of judges, they're supposed to make these decisions based off of what you think would make a fair democracy. I would think. I'm not a judge. I don't know. But if a federal judge can make these decisions, why is it suddenly the Supreme Court is out of this equation, at least in their mind, out of this equation to make that decision? And there's plenty of things in the original part of the Constitution that wouldn't have come up. Yeah, gerrymandering was not something that the founding fathers were thinking about, right? They also weren't thinking about civil rights.
The founding fathers didn't have to gerrymander. The people that they're splitting up in these districts were actually owned by them.
Yeah.
Keeping it real.
Why don't we go into some examples of how bad this can actually be in actual practice. But first, in her dissent to Roberts' ruling, Justice Elena Kagan wrote that, quote, "Gerrymanders like the one here may irreparably damage our system of government." I wanna give you the example of how this sort of process actually works and how it can be used in a state-specific basis to give an advantage to a party, but also how significant that can be once you apply it across something like 50 states. So we have an Assemblyman, David Lewis, a Republican of North Carolina, who had previously said, "I think electing Republicans is better than electing Democrats. So I drew this map to help foster what I think is better for the country. I propose that we draw the maps to give a partisan advantage to 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats, because I do not believe it's possible to draw a map with 11 Republicans and 2 Democrats. But understand that if he could draw a map that gave 13 Republicans and 0 Democrats, that's the map that we would have."
Right.
But instead he thought the best I can do is 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And in fact, in 2016, Republican congressional candidates won 53% of the statewide vote, and they won 10 of the 13 congressional districts, or 77%. They won a very narrow majority of the overall vote, but they got almost all of the actual political representation, which is certainly significant. And then let's go a little bit broader. Some more examples. If you look at in 2018 in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and North Carolina, we're gonna bring up this chart and you're gonna see the difference between the percentage of the vote that the Democrats got in those states. In all of those cases, they got the majority of the vote, but in none of those cases did they even get half of the actual seats in Congress. And depending on which state, it's either 45%, 47%. Now, in any particular state, this might mean 1 or 2 or 3 seats that they don't get.
Right.
But then you multiply that across the country and you have the difference between having the minority or the majority in the House of Representatives, which is obviously incredibly significant nationally.
But they will still fight and talk about how, our election system is the way it is, it's fine or overwhelming. We heard Donald Trump talking earlier in the week, or maybe even late last week, about the popular vote. Doesn't matter, they didn't win it. Oh, in fact, he did win it. Oh, well, our election system's the best one because you keep messing with it in these terms. So, I mean, we've gotten to the point now where this particular state rep was talking about, you don't have to even hide it. I'm not sure if they ever began to. I was gonna say hide it anymore. They probably never hit it. Just say straight up, I believe Republicans need to be elected, so I'm gonna do things to make sure Republicans get elected. What part of democracy is that? You don't have to be a Supreme Court justice to understand that equation that he just put forward. I believe this. One guy, along with 7 to 8 other guys, let's just do it this way because I feel that way. What if one of the two in the minority that you've created said, I don't feel that way? What do we call that?
Right.
Overwhelming your democracy with unfair election systems. Why would anyone applaud that? It should be talked about in every election, every campaign when you're talking about replacing these people and see if people really are proud of this American best system in the world.
Look, and best case scenario, hey, maybe in a particular case, a particular state Supreme Court might decide that a map had been gerrymandered in a partisan fashion and they might overturn it. Maybe, that's what we're hoping for. But understand that in some states, those positions on the courts are elected positions as well. Those are partisan positions. And in many cases, if it's a Republican Supreme Court at the state level, maybe they'll rule that it's fine. Or maybe they'll just say, well, look, the Supreme Court said that it's not up to them. Maybe it's not up to us. So, we take our hands off the whole process. The Republicans who control state government can determine it for themselves. And this, again, is incredibly important. This isn't some philosophical debate, just some judicial debate. This is about power in America. Back in 2010, across all House seats, all House races, Democratic candidates received a nationwide plurality of more than 1.4 million votes more than the Republicans. But the Republican Party won a 33-seat majority, thus retaining its House majority by 17 seats. So even though the Democrats got more votes, it didn't matter. Now we're used to this happening in Senate races. It happens all the time because of the way that you only have 2 spots, so you can win a big state like California, and it only has as much representation as a state that has like 5 people in it. But it's happening in the House as well. We know we have to go broader because we know Donald Trump didn't win as many votes as Hillary Clinton did.
Right.
That's becoming a constant thing across Republican presidential candidates, and still they win it. Now, they also get the Supreme Court too, because even when a Democrat's in the White House, they don't give them the seats that they deserve. And so whether it's at the state level, if it's in the House, if it's in the Senate, if it's in the White House, if it's in the Supreme Court, democracy doesn't mean anything. Sure, it's on the papers, but in practice, you don't actually get the representation that you vote for. And this is not some accident. We're not finding a bunch of unrelated coincidences.
Right.
This is part of a nationwide ongoing campaign of the Republican Party against democracy because they have realized at long last that they simply cannot win national elections anymore. Their platforms, nobody actually supports them. Their conservative white minority is growing smaller with every passing day. They fear demographic change that they see happening all over the country. And so they have decided that democracy is not for us. And that is why you're seeing things like Mitch McConnell denying a seat on the Supreme Court, and you're seeing voter ID. You're seeing all of this, including, we're gonna talk about in just a minute, the census question and gerrymandering. All of these things are designed to stop you from getting the government that you vote for. And it doesn't matter, really, because they can be against people voting. They can try to limit it as much as possible, and nobody says anything about it. And it doesn't hurt them at all. They live in a representative democracy. They are violently opposed to representative democracy, and nobody really brings it up as an issue.
Right, and you were talking about being proud. They are proud of this. This is the plan, this is the point. They have gerrymandered the Supreme Court, our states, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The federal election was kind of given to them in this weird system that we've outgrown. But yeah, they are proud of this.
Yeah.
This is the point.
Well, why don't we turn to the second?
Nothing done fairly.
Jared, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, because this is the problem. We talk about grassroots. This is the grassroots version of Republicans getting what they want as far as the election system. So, we got tons of people, generally, I hate to generalize, but as Americans, we think about, oh, the election that matters is the presidency. And then something called that Senate and every once in a while the House. And it gets lessened from that point on. You don't get a chance to really know who your state representatives are, who your local councilmen members are, all these levels of government that then leads to the next thing up. as we just broke down, happens in a certain way to get to the highest point, and then get people like Supreme Court justices in, or get someone like Mitch McConnell to make sure no other Supreme Court justices get in under a president that's still sitting. It's all connected. We have to understand how these things work. If you go out in the street and you ask folks in general, I mean, I don't like these man in the street things necessarily. Ask anyone, what is gerrymandering?
No idea.
Yeah.
Regular folks don't know. And it's not, I've always said it's not necessarily their fault. They just got home from their 9 to 5. They're trying to have dinner.
Yeah.
They don't have time to study about gerrymandering, which is why this is one of the most effective ways to break down our democracy.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And look, I don't have the numbers here, but you can find it. When I talk about that they're turning away from democracy, I'm not just talking about the electoral strategy by the elected Republicans. You can look at the actual polls. Their base, when asked, is democracy the best way to run a government, they are turning against it. Those numbers are changing over time, and that should not be a surprise. The historic, the traditional attachment to representative democracy was contingent on those democratic results delivering power to conservative white individuals. If it's not gonna do that anymore, then they're not interested in it and they will turn to some other system. We see Donald Trump, someone who wants to emulate strongman autocrats from around the globe. It's not a coincidence that they're turning to someone like that. If they think that that is how they will maintain political and economic power, then that's the future. Democracy is simply the past. One other just interesting note, because we were talking about examples of this. Wisconsin Democrats won every statewide election in 2018, but did not win majorities in either chamber of the state legislature. So they won all of the state, but they could not actually get control of the state legislature because of this sort of process.
And also, one more thing we were talking about earlier, how this is so blatantly about race. And I couldn't remember the name of the college, but it's an HBCU. Not only that, it's the nation's largest, North Carolina A&T University. The districts, it's literally split through the college. Yeah. The HBCU is split in half.
To minimize its power.
Wild, right?
Yeah, and they have sophisticated computer programs that allow them to do this down to the block level. Okay, so there was also a ruling on the addition of a citizenship question to the census, which is something that Republicans have been pushing for fairly obvious reasons. It's only become obvious to people in power and in the media recently because of a hard drive showing the sort of racial reason behind it. But thankfully, the Supreme Court did decide that at least for right now, that cannot be added to the census, although we're not done with this topic. The Trump administration claimed that the question is necessary because it would help with enforcing Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which deals with voting practices that discriminate based on race. The idea behind this is that having this data would help prevent the drawing of congressional maps in ways that discriminate against minority citizens of voting age. On that question, Chief Justice John Roberts said, the court cannot ignore the disconnect between the decision made and the explanation given. Neither respondents nor my colleagues have been able to identify any relevant, judicially manageable limits on the Secretary's decision to put a core demographic question back on the census. And in case this needs to be clarified, again, even though we've done it over and over and over again, Republicans keep saying that the census is designed to count the number of citizens. It's not, and it's specifically cited in the Constitution that it's not, where it says representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, not citizens, persons, including those bound to service for a term of years and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. So a couple of other national stains they're listed as well. But they're trying to add in a new one into the census, and thankfully, at least for now, they've been stopped.
Were you surprised when you saw the news this morning?
When I saw this particular one, yes.
You were, yeah.
Yeah, we have a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, and in general, over the past year and a half or so, it has delivered constant wins for conservatives, for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, on the gerrymandering, like I know that people who watch this don't need another reminder, but this is why the Supreme Court is so important. And the Supreme Court is one of the reasons that presidential elections are so important. Because when you hand over power to someone like Donald Trump, this is the sort of news that you wake up to for literally years, if not decades. And they're gonna use that conservative majority, whether this next election is a re-election for Donald Trump, whether we get some centrist Democrat or whether we get a progressive, they're gonna be able to count on their conservative majority in the Supreme Court to protect them from the boldest legislation and to continue to give them wins in areas of workers' rights, the environment, and voting rights as well.
I was surprised too. I think these two cases are similar in the way that it's obvious. It's obvious to everybody. But luckily in the census question, there was just blatant proof, just laid out word for word on what they were doing. But regardless of that, the Trump administration was willing to say, no, we need to know where every Hispanic person lives so that we can protect them, because we are not the administration that ever discriminates. Absolutely not. They were willing to run on that argument and go with it. All the way to the Supreme Court.
It's every level they can think of. By the way, don't let the smooth taste fool you. I don't care how many times Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh are gonna accidentally stumble themselves across the right way to adjudicate things like this. I never trust. That's all. That's just my approach to these things. Yeah. This is such a surprise. Yeah, it is a surprise because it's not going to happen very often.
Yeah. Enjoy it while you can, and enjoy this while you can, because again, as I've been saying, this is not over. They say in their decision that there's really not much time. There's a few months, I think, until the census needs to be submitted. And as of right now, they're saying if the Trump administration wants to do a little bit more research and then come back with another explanation as to why they need a citizenship question, then they're free to do that. Or they can potentially, I guess, try to postpone the census, even though it's very specifically listed in the Constitution that needs to happen on this periodic basis. I don't know how they would do that when the process so far has taken literally years. But right now, they have been given the opportunity to try once again to cover up the obvious racist motivations for this addition to the census, and it might end up getting added in the end.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.